Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Like I've said in the past few ones, it's hard to believe that this has been going on for 3 months, but we're really happy to have everyone here joining us from across the country. And we actually had someone join us from Germany yesterday, which is pretty cool. So it's great to see that so many coaches are taking advantage of these educational sessions. So tonight we have Bryce Tully back again with another mental performance topic. So a lot of coaches reached out wanting to know more about mindfulness. So we asked Bryce to come on here. He's a mental performance consultant at Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic, but also works with our Olympic national basketball team, or the women's basketball team. So we're really excited to have Bryce on here and to share his wisdom on the topic of mindfulness. So Bryce, I'll get you to take it away from here. And just a reminder to everyone to stick to the chat box, and we'll open up for Q&A at the end. And we will be using Menti at one point, so just maybe have your cell phone handy for when that does come about. And Bryce, will get you to take it away.
Thanks, Kirsty. Kirsty, is it okay if kind of intermittently throughout, if I do want to get some feedback just kind of verbally from the group, people can engage their mic?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just make
Okay.
sure participants that you don't engage until Bryce says so, just so we don't get all that feedback from various mics.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry if you hear that weird noise in the background. My dog just got home from a nice little walk, it looks like, so she's pretty thirsty and she's just kind of guzzling some water. But that will go away shortly. So yeah, Kirsty reached out to me a while back and said that there was some request for some information on mindfulness. So, you know, the bulk of this presentation will be on, well, it's kind of on two things. One is I'm going to be making kind of my case for why mindfulness matters. And then part two will be, you know, what mindfulness is kind of at a fundamental level. And I'll be sharing some examples of how we use it with the senior women's national team in the sport of basketball when we're in our training environment, when we're on the road, to try and make it as practical as possible. So the image that you see in front of you, I like on a bunch of levels, but there's one thing that bothers me about it because it doesn't really get it right in terms of capturing the essence of mindfulness and how it can apply to the athlete population. And if there's any brave souls out there who want to take a crack at, what do you think I'm talking about when I say that? What might maybe not be resonating or working in this photo as it applies to the athlete population? I'll wait 10 seconds and then I'll just give the answer. I'm going to give it another 5 seconds. I'm holding out hope for someone to take a crack at it.
I'll try.
Okay, Jenna, what's up? What do you think?
Maybe just that it's kind of like separated into like a black and a white. So it's like there's only two different options instead of like with athletes. I feel like mindfulness can kind of go in any direction, whereas this kind of makes it out to be like a left and a right, and that's it.
It's funny, like every time you ask a kind of an open-ended question like this, I find you learn something almost better than what you were going to say. So that's not what I was thinking, but I appreciate the new lens that you've put on it for sure. The thing that I really gravitated towards was, you know, this person is sitting in like that classic meditation position. And I just want to make it super clear, and that's why, you know, I kind of asked that silly question, that you don't have to sit in a funny position. You don't have to light any candles. You don't have to have a particular belief system of any kind for mindfulness to work for you. This is a stigma that I think we're going to be better off if we get past. And I hope that some of the examples that I share throughout this kind of prove that. But it definitely should not and does not have to be viewed as anything more than an evidence-based training method that athletes can use and benefit from both in and out of the training environment. So I've just put a concentration grid there, and I'm just showing it to you just for a second so you can kind of wrap your mind around it. And when I go to this screen, I'm going to go back to that concentration grid. What I want you to do is I'm going to give you 1 minute. I'm going to time it on my cell phone. And I want you to find as many numbers as you can in order. So start with number 1. And once you find the number 1, try and find the number 2, try and find the number 3, and so on. And I'm actually going to say 45 seconds instead of a minute. So I'm going to put it back up, and then I'll get some feedback on how this went for you. And it's a competition, I should mention that. So you're going to try and beat everybody else right now. Honor system. 3, 2, 1, go. And stop. Okay, I'm going to leave it up for a second just so you can work through some of those demons of wondering if that last number you were on actually exists on the page, if it was a trick of some kind, or I was just kind of taking you for a loop there. But I guarantee you that all the numbers are there in order, and I'm assuming no one got to the very end of this. But I share this for a particular reason. And again, I want you to vocalize here. So, you know, I can't see you at this moment, but use your microphone. So as you're doing that exercise, what were some of the internal mental distractions, anything that kind of flew through your mind, a thought that you had that took you off course, that was really unrelated or at least unhelpful to the task at hand? So take a second, think about that, and just turn your mic on and just share with us. Let's try and learn from each other as best we can.
Hi, Bryce. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
So it's a good thing. Concentration grid. Like when I was going through it, the point I was having in my mind was probably like if for example I take 1, for example, the 2 should be near the corner somewhere closer to 1, right? It should not be. Yeah. So. But 2 is really far from it. That was like the point. So the point was, when you focus on one thing and you think, okay, some success is around the corner somewhere, but it's really far. Like you have to really work for it, right? That kind of stuff's coming to my mind.
Yeah, thanks. Good example. I'm gonna come back to that one in a second. Anyone else? Do we have one more person who can share something that may have distracted them along the way?
I think Leon raised his hand, so feel free to speak up if you.
Thanks, Kirsty. You can facilitate that if you can see the screen.
Yeah, hi, Bryce. When I was looking at it, I was just looking for a pattern of location of numbers, like where they set up a certain way or spaced out a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it was a distraction, but it was just the way that I was looking to see if there was a pattern or some type of system to it, but it was just truly random.
Right. Yeah, and that's, you know, these are good examples, and I'll share a few more that I've heard come out a number of times. I mean, the 2 that you guys just shared are, you know, basically assumptions about the process that ended up not being helpful because they were inaccurate. And it's little simple things like that that happen so quickly and unconsciously between stimulus and response. Stimulus being me giving you a task and instruction, telling you it's a competition, and then the response being, you know, your mind just jumping to conclusions, you know, setting expectations that maybe aren't realistic, making assumptions. But the other common ones are, you know, a lot of people say they think, well, oh my gosh, I'm only on 5. I bet everyone else is further than me. So they start, you know, making these comparisons to people within the group that, you know, clearly aren't based in fact or evidence. Or they jump to a thought like, oh, this number's probably not here. I bet this was a trick because I can't find the number 6. That's the whole thing. I'm supposed to cope with this, and adapt to this stress or this challenge. So this is how quickly that this happens, and this is kind of the foundation of mindfulness. And I'm just going to get you to go on to menti.com on your phone. So you'll see it on the top of my screen here in 1 second. So you should see at the top of my screen, menti.com, MENTI, and then the code is Adhd19. And I've just posed some questions there on kind of sliding scales from strongly disagree to agree. And, these are kind of typical mindfulness questions that you would see in a mindfulness assessment, just trying to make sure we're all kind of appreciating and understanding what the concept of mindfulness gets at. So if you could just answer these in menti.com on your phone, and we'll get a sense of kind of how people experience these different mindfulness-based questions. I don't see any coming in, so if there's a technical glitch, please let me know. Oh, there we go. Okay, we have some coming in now. Okay, we have 3 responses, so we still have a lot more to come in. We'll give another 30 seconds here. "11 responses. We've still got some folks out there. "10 seconds. Okay. So I kind of grabbed these questions, and I have done this. We've done this a number of times in our Canada basketball environment. We try and do things like this every day or every few days to keep people's awareness high, not necessarily for data collection, not necessarily for any sort of assessment that's tracked formally in any way. Just when we do our mindfulness sessions, I'll put things like this up on the screen in advance of the session and then after the session, and see if things have changed as they did, 10 or 15 minutes of mindfulness. So these ones are really, in my opinion, relevant to the athlete population, to performers, experiencing an emotion and not know that that's happening consciously until sometime later, which everyone's saying that these things are happening, above the 2.5 kind of halfway point. So these are clearly relevant to you guys too, as performers. Noticing physical tension or discomfort until they really grab your attention, that can make a difference on the free throw line for sure. Getting so focused on a goal that you want to achieve that you just completely lose touch with what's happening and what you're doing right now to get there, because it could be not at all in service of that. I don't know why my email is opening randomly. It tends to do that. Oh my, what is this? Sorry. There we go. So this is what mindfulness is kind of all about. Are these types of questions, are you able to pay attention in the present moment, notice things that are impacting your thinking, that are impacting your feeling, that are impacting ultimately your behavior? And we use a quote from a guy named George Mumford who did, and I'll show you some more on this as we go through, but he worked with the Lakers and the Bulls for a long time, multiple championships as the head mindfulness coach with Phil Jackson. And one of his, the way that he communicates, one of the things he says is, what's on your mind? Because what's on your mind is going to become your reality. So the starting point for us to achieve excellence is what's on your mind. And in our Canada basketball model, which some of you may have seen, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but we have three basic pillars that we try and make sure everything is related to in some way in our mental performance training. And it's conscious, connected, composed. And the conscious part is all about working on me, right? So that's where it starts. And then, once you work on you, now let's work on us. Once we work on us, let's work under pressure together. And I just want to visualize this in another way. So if we look at this as a pyramid that kind of progresses upward, the bottom foundation of that is work on me. You have to be conscious. You have to be self-aware of the way you think and feel and behave, because that's what you bring to the team environment, right? We need people to bring the best version of themselves, a high performance version of themselves, or at least a high performing mind to the equation if we're going to work well together, and then ultimately translate that into working well under pressure. And honestly, the way that I look at this is, working on you is about 60% of performance. So, and this is, the research would never nail it down to a number this definitive, but as a staff, when we talked about this, we were comfortable sharing this number of 60% as, we really believe that you can attribute 60% of how you perform in that final step under pressure to what you do to work on yourself in all of those moments that nobody sees. And in those mindfulness sessions and on your own time, when we give you some mindfulness tasks to do, which I'll talk about a little later, the connected part, when we work on us, is about 30% of performance. And that part goes a lot better if people bring a high performing brain or a high performing mind to the group environment. And then finally, that, composed tip is working under pressure, managing distractions when they really matter. The distractions are more demanding. Controlling your focus is more difficult than in a classroom or a dressing room or, on a bus, like places we would do mindfulness. And so that's about 10% of performance because it's so infrequent. But, just like a classic iceberg model, it's also the most visible. So, performing under pressure gets a lot of attention, but it is in reality, a small part of the life that you lead as a high performer. And that 90% under the surface is what really contributes in a big way to that final 10%. You can't start at that 10% and work backwards. I really think you have to work on you, work on us. And then finally, we can work under pressure as an accumulation of those things that we've done together. So obviously, mindfulness is a, basically kind of a fancy way to say self-awareness, and self-awareness is super common. I'm sure you all have a good sense of what it is, but I would just like to, kind of highlight a few things here. One, I really like this analogy that self-awareness is like your brain looking in the mirror, right? Like your brain's doing a lot of things, and mindfulness as an activity or as a training process is really just the opportunity for your brain to look into the mirror at itself and go, what's on my mind? What's firing right now in here? I should be noticing that, because what's firing in here is going to become my behavior and my reality. So on the left, we have, broad awareness, things like, I'm sure you'd love your athletes to have a lot of these attributes on the broad side. So what are their strengths? What are their goals? What are their values? Those get a lot of attention in the sports psych realm. But then we have the more narrow awareness. And the narrow awareness is where mindfulness is most applicable. The broad awareness is not really something that comes up in mindfulness training, at least with us, a whole lot. But narrow awareness is. So that's like, what's on my mind right now? What am I feeling today? What have I felt today? What is my role here in this room right now? And that can change from room to room, from game to game. So those paying attention to those really narrow things that they're going to impact you in the here and now is that narrow awareness. And this is George Mumford. As I mentioned before, kind of a classic mindfulness coach. One of the first, he has a great book called The Mindful Athlete. It's just like literally a gold mine of anecdotes. Like this guy just, by the end of it, you're just going, how are we not doing mindfulness all the time? Like that's the kind of communicator he is and the kind of book it is. I just love this line, what's on your mind? Because what's on your mind is going to become your reality. It applies to everything. It applies to your preparation. It applies to what you're thinking about in the moment. It really is a pervasive way of thinking. And I would just add that as human beings, we have this totally unique ability to observe our own thinking, and we shouldn't take that for granted. So unlike animals, we can feel an emotion and observe and name what that emotion is as we're feeling it. That's a completely unique skill set. And because it's the kind of the last part of us to evolve, it's right in the front of our brains where that happens, the last part of the brain to be kind of constructed. It's the hardest one to do. So it kind of doesn't come to us as natural as some of those intense emotions hit us, and they send chemicals through our body to take action. But on top of all of that is this computer that can actually go, I'm feeling angry right now. And it can actually, if you're really trained in it, start to compute, well, what I'm probably going to do because I'm angry is X, Y, and Z. And if I do X, Y, and Z, it's either in service or not in service of that goal that I'm trying to get. So if you can get to that level, you're in a really good spot. Now, unfortunately, as humans, and I just want to take a second to highlight this because it's so critical to this sort of mindfulness system, is we're predisposed to have more negative thoughts than positive. So what you notice on the screen is more negative signs than positive signs to represent what's called a negative bias. And a negative bias is really annoying and in a lot of ways unhelpful in today's world. But the reason it was built in is the reason that we're here today. It was critical, still has some good function today. But way back when, our brain basically made this executive decision based on evolution that it needs to remember the things that could harm us more than it needs to remember the things that we just find a little bit enjoyable or made us happy. Because the things that could harm us could end us. So, this is the system that if you're standing under a coconut tree and one falls on your head and 10,000 years ago, you're unconscious for a few minutes, well, maybe a concussion would prevent the remembering. But ultimately, when something bad happens to you, you remember it so vividly and it just sticks. And our brain has it's like sticky notes in your brain. And the sticky notes associated with negative events are a lot bigger and brighter than the sticky notes that are associated with positive ones, because it's protecting us. It wants us to make sure that we don't run into the same issues twice that could cause us harm and prevent our survival. A great example of this is, if you asked a room full of people who are above the age of 30, what did you do for your your 22nd birthday? And people are like, I don't know, like so many birthdays. I'm not sure, but in the moment of your 22nd birthday, you had this amazing time, but it kind of just blends in with all the other birthdays. You can't pinpoint who you're with or where you went. If you ask that same group of people, who remembers what you were doing and who you were with during 9/11, 100% of the people will tell you exactly where they were, where they walked, who they walked with, what they spoke about, where they watched it, when their parents came home. Like, there's so many details of that event that people remember. That's the negative bias in full effect. And that's the dopamine associated with these emotions that come with negative events is so strong. A good way to think about this, simple little acronym, I think is the word I'm looking for, is ANTS. So these are automatic negative thoughts, and everyone has them. And if you're a homeowner, wherever you live, really, that ants suck. They're really annoying. But they're never going to go away. You're never going to get rid of them completely. You can manage them, but at some point when you're out in your yard, you're going to see some ants walking around doing their thing, and that's okay. You don't let it totally disrupt your whole day or make you think that your lawn is off track and that it's going to die and the ants are going to ruin everything. You just kind of accept them as a reality. And that's why I love this analogy of automatic negative thoughts. The last piece I wanted to share on this is a little analogy about uncertainty and attention. And all of this is, again, just me making my case for mindfulness. And we're going to get into the more nuanced parts of mindfulness here in a few minutes. So let's imagine I asked you, to walk into a dark room that you've never been in before, and you're going to stand there for 3 hours and all you have is a flashlight. You know nothing about this room and you don't know much about me. I'm just asking you to do it. So in this analogy, let's picture that the dark room is representative of uncertainty. So anything that, that's new to you in life, that comes with, you know, an outcome that you're not sure how it's going to go. So a lot of things related to performance. That's what this dark room represents. And let's say that the flashlight that you're given is your attention. So what you pay attention to through that uncertainty. When you walk into that room, the first thing that you're going to do is scan for danger. That's just how we work, right? You're going to take the flashlight and you're going to, anything that makes a little noise, you're going to quickly go boom, and you're going to shine it over there and see if everything's okay. If you hear something on the right side, you might shine it over there now. You might see a shadow or something, or wonder if, even if you can take a step right in front of, if you want to walk forward, you don't know if it's going to fall off somewhere. So you're going to utilize that resource of the flashlight in a way that protects you and makes sure, it will make sure you stay safe. And that's natural. Everyone's going to do that. So eventually though, as you start to, scan the whole room and notice that, things are okay in here. I haven't found anything that's going to cause me a lot of danger, yada, yada, yada. You might actually start using that flashlight to find things that are opportunities now, not just threats. So you're slowly going to transition from this threat mindset over to this opportunity mindset by shining that flashlight, which is your attention, on things that maybe help you. So you could take a seat so you don't have to stand the whole time. Where's a comfortable place to sit? Maybe there's a book in there that you could find and you could shine the flashlight on there to read and better yourself while you're in there. But at some point, you're going to manage that attention in a way that helps you. The issue here is that, when people are very untrained mentally, without knowing it, they can spend the entire 3 hours in the room scanning for the same threats over and over and over because they're so uncertain about what's going on, and they don't know how to utilize that flashlight in a way that allows them to exit the room in a way that's better, more developed than when they went in, because they spent the whole thing in fear. And this is kind of the nature of mindfulness training, is trying to help athletes understand how to direct their attention, how to allocate their attention on things that actually work in our favor and bring us benefit, versus constantly scanning the environment for things that could cause us harm, even though that's our most natural built-in way of functioning. Now, from an athlete's standpoint, if we extend this to, in this case, the sport of basketball, there's a lot of things that come into play when you're at a big event, especially like, something like the Olympics or an Olympic qualifier, really any significant event for an athlete. You've got lots of things, and I've just put a few up here. You've got, the score of your game and the score of all the other games. You've got the game of basketball itself. You've got all the social media stuff that is happening about that game of basketball and articles being written. You've got your teammates and trying to keep everybody happy. You've got the tactics of the game. You've got things you need to remember. And then you've got fans who are, in some cases there quite intentionally to distract you. And the point I want to make about this is aspects of each of these things can become threats if you don't manage your attention appropriately. So you could be, paying attention to the score at a time when really you should be paying attention to the tactics. And a really key point here is there's a big difference between focus and attention. Attention is all about direction. So attention is where you point your flashlight, okay? Focus is about the clarity on that thing. So the focus is when you kind of, tweak the end of the flashlight to make sure it's the right kind of beam of light so you can see that thing clearly. Attention is all about direction. Focus is all about quality. So mindfulness as a starting point is really all about attention. So it's about figuring out the direction of your attention and where you want to put it, and how quickly it can get off track and be on something else. Like when we did that number grid exercise, all of a sudden, boom, you're paying attention to something you read on social media right before a timeout in the fourth quarter. That's just a really, really poor allocation of attention. The quality of it is almost irrelevant, because where you're shining that light is towards something that caused you to feel scared or threatened, or you wonder what they're going to write about you. And it's really not how you should be executing this moment of uncertainty in this situation. Now, we can break this into kind of three main parts before we get into the nuances of mindfulness. And those three parts are self-awareness, control, and resilience as they apply to this concept of attention. So the self-awareness piece is quite simple. It's knowing what typically distracts you So you, the coach, or you, the athlete, you, the performer, and the impacts of those things on you specifically. So physically, what happens to you. In the questionnaire, we talked about, tension and noticing tension in parts of your body. The person with very low mindfulness doesn't notice that physical tension until, way later, when they really, can't ignore it anymore. But your body language, your expressions, the way you hold your shoulders or cross your arms, or put your head back, these physical indicators of what's on your mind are picked up on by your athletes, and they ripple through the group. So knowing what distracts you and the impact of those things on you physically as a coach is really critical. And also knowing what happens to you mentally as these things distract you. So, when you get pulled by something over there, maybe thinking about a referee or something like that, what does that start to extend into? So, what does the next 10 seconds look like for you when that happens? What emotions start to kind of compile when that thing draws your attention over there instead of over there? So, the self-awareness piece is really important. You can gain a lot of insight about yourself just by very simply identifying what are those three things that might distract me in this moment, and then physically and mentally, what are the impacts of those things on me? The second one is control. So this is just being intentional about what you pay attention to in each moment. So if you could break up your performances, in the sport of basketball, we break it up into like 5 basic chunks, offense and defense, and then we have some, in between things that kind of define the key attentional demands in a game. So one of the things that I'll work through with the players is to talk about and visualize, what are you planning to pay attention to in that moment? So, in a timeout, when the score matters and it's so close, and you want that flashlight, like your brain is just trying to put that flashlight up on the scoreboard, where should your attention be? Does the score, does time and score matter most to you right now? Does the flashlight need to go to it just for 5 seconds so you get some context and perspective? And then that flashlight comes down to the board and to the coach's expressions, and to what's being, communicated to you. So attention is great because it's something that you can kind of control in the snap of your fingers. It's actually one of the more controllable parts of our mindset overall, way more controllable than emotion, as a side point. Resilience, as it applies to attention, is just keeping your attention sharp through adversity and pressure. So the attentional demands get more challenging, and your flashlight becomes more challenging to kind of manage and control if you're not training it to be shining on the right things in the right moment. So these are the 3 things that, you can kind of break it into as we look at attention. And I just thought I'd share this because, this is, it's an important point that, your tired mind, if you're a runner in this case, it will slow you down. But the point of this is that mental fatigue makes a big difference. And it's very clear now in the science of this that your brain takes up about 30% of your body's energy. So in this case, when runners did a 45-minute computer task, which was like, moving targets around and matching up colors, basically just simple things to fatigue them, they performed worse when they ran. And this is a common and classic finding, that your perceived effort goes up, but also, if your brain takes up 30% of your body's energy, if you're really distracted and you're paying attention to the wrong things and those things are causing you stress, your whole system is going to fatigue more quickly. So it's in your best interest in so many different ways to make sure that you're allocating your attention in a way that's saving you energy, keeping you on task, and not causing you to be threatened by things that really have no space in that moment that you're in. So mindfulness training is it's definitely one of the most scientifically proven consciousness raising exercises in the world at this stage. I'm going to show a slide next that's overwhelming for anybody who looks at it, and I don't share it for you to take any notes or memorize any of it. It's just a study to show that, this is a meta study of like a bunch of different mindfulness research done over the past little while. And it's looking at the type of meditation or mindfulness. And I'm kind of using those interchangeably, but we can think of it as mindfulness meditation. That's what we're going to talk about here in a second. It shows, the type of study, it shows the type of measurement, and then the key areas of the brain affected. So there's so much evidence now that the brain responds to mindfulness like the body does to a workout, that it's just undeniable that your attention improves, as you do more of it. And I'm actually going to show this slide first. So mindfulness meditation, it has three main impacts from a research lens. The first one is attentional control. So it allows you to shine that flashlight where it should be shining, on things that bring you benefit and opportunity, and direct you towards task relevant cues more frequently. It also allows you to notice when that flashlight has spent too much time in the wrong place, or when you're trying to shine it somewhere and it just kind of drifts off on its own. Mindfulness significantly improves an athlete's ability to notice that they're just not paying attention to the right things. So that's really good. The other two are emotion regulation and self-awareness. So emotion regulation is, long story short, is kind of what I said before. It allows people to notice more quickly when they're in a certain emotional state, and then as you get more advanced, what the impact of that state is going to be. So that one of the questions on the survey was, I could be, experiencing some strong emotion and not notice until sometime later. Mindfulness is going to help your athletes and help you as a coach, as a performer, notice in the moment that, like, I'm feeling angry right now, or I'm feeling, overexcited right now, or I'm feeling frustrated right now. It allows you to identify more quickly. So that's a really good benefit as well. And then number three is self-awareness. So it just helps that it's basically the process of, of your brain looking in the mirror and asking that question, what's on my mind right now? And I'll show you a slide on that in a second. So what is it? I just want to make sure you guys have a really clear definition of mindfulness. Mindfulness is non-judgmental attention to present moment experiences. So it's a misconception that someone would execute or get into a mindfulness session of any kind with the purpose of never being distracted. That's a total misconception. A big part, the actual necessary component of mindfulness is to notice when you become distracted. So if there's no distractions, your challenge level isn't high enough. And, for most of us, and for most people and the athletes that I work with, the challenge level is not hard to get to the right level. You don't need to put people in this crazy environment for them to improve their attention. Literally just trying to pay attention to your breath or try and find numbers on a number grid is enough to make you notice when you're distracted. It's that simple. So it's non-judgmental attention to something that's going on in the present. So you're putting your head above your body. So your body never has a choice. Your body is always in the present. It's always where you are. It's about positioning your mind above your body in a way that it's also where you are. The non-judgmental part is really important because of a negative bias. This is why I shared this earlier. We're all going to become distracted at some point. By nature, by our primal wiring, we are all going to jump to some bad conclusion. We're going to make assumptions that are not right. We're going to feel threatened by things that we shouldn't pay attention to in that situation. That we're not trying to eliminate that altogether. That's an unrealistic training goal. What we're trying to do is notice more quickly when we get pulled to those places, and then develop a strategy for coming back quickly in a way where you don't blame or judge yourself for being distracted or feeling a certain way. Emotions especially emotions are always the first on the scene. We're wired to react that way. To be judgmental about how you're feeling in a situation is definitely not the way to go. So from an emotional standpoint, the non-judgmental part is critical. We've had players in tie games with literally, Argentina, we had a tie game with 13 seconds left, and no one on our team ever thought we'd be in that situation. Argentina was playing like out of their minds. They were at home. There was like 10,000 fans. It felt like literally on the court. They couldn't miss, it felt like. And that moment, like 13 seconds left in a must-win tie game to kind of move on to the next round of this whole Olympic process, that was not the time to judge and feel like, oh, we shouldn't be in this situation. Oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. Yeah, your mind is going to, maybe go there on its own, but you need to very quickly be able to notice that and come back, ideally within the span of less than a second, to go, that's not where I need to be. Let's put my flashlight over here. So I just want to share with you what I think is the simplest way to teach mindfulness. This is what I call the mindfulness loop. The mindfulness loop is made up of 3 parts that you see here. And it's very simple. It's aim, sustain, regain. That's the simulation. That's what you're trying to create in a mindfulness session. So the aim part is you want to anchor your attention on something in the present moment. So something that's associated with where you are now. This is why the breath is such a common anchor for doing mindfulness. So with some of the younger athletes, 16, 17 years old in the junior academy program, as they come through the national team, the first thing that we do is just work on aiming. So we'll do 3 minutes of just aiming. So you're just trying to find somewhere that you can anchor your attention onto in the present moment as you just sit in a chair. And we actually give them a diagram of their upper body and get them to circle, when we ask them to pay attention to their breath, whatever they want to pay attention to about their breath, and then circle and explain, what they gravitated towards. Everyone seems to have a different anchor, and that's okay. So some people say the feeling of my chest kind of pushing out and then going back. Some people say the air on the tip of my nose coming in and going out. Some people say something like, I almost imagined like an aura around my body that got bigger and smaller on every breath. But something about that feeling of your breath that you can aim your attention at, because that's going to serve as your anchor. So in the simulation model, that's, the whiteboard and the timeout, or that's the, your eyes locked on the hoop in that moment, or that's, you making physical contact or eye contact with your teammate in that moment where you need them to set that screen. So it just simulates that there's something about this moment that I need to prioritize and pay attention to, and I'm going to commit to that fully. The second part of that is sustain. So let's keep it there as long as we can, but we know that it's not going to stay there forever. So you want to create a relationship with that stimulus in that moment that allows you to stay anchored on it, and you can notice things about it, and it feels like you're in control. But you also have to accept that at some stage, something's going to distract you from that, and that's okay. The whole point of this is to get to stage 3, which is regain. And it's how quickly can you regain it. So if you're paying attention to that feeling of your chest going in and out for 5 minutes, as we all sit, with our eyes closed, and all of a sudden you think about, I wonder why my dad hasn't called me in a few days, or, oh, I hated that meeting that we had last week, or, oh, I hope they have that new cheese that they had last meal. Who cares? That's okay. That's a moment where you have to practice your non-judgment and just very calmly and in a composed manner get back to what you were trying to focus on in the first place. The more times you do this loop, the more your brain changes, and the more it notices that it's gone somewhere where it shouldn't necessarily be. And so we just practice that in a repetitive way as much as we possibly can. So our mindfulness sessions are typically all about this: aim, sustain, regain, to the point where we can create this habit loop where when we're off track or our mind is off base, the habit for us is to anchor it back in something that matches where our body is. And that's such an important skill. The last piece I want to share on this, before I just show you some pictures from our environment, and then we'll get into some questions, is, everyone's faced with this challenge in everyday life. And as performers, we're definitely faced with this relationship between stimulus and response. So, things present themselves to you. There's always 2 environments at play in every situation: the external and the internal. The external is largely out of your control. At best, there's small influence over it. The internal is all within your control. No one else can really influence it. And by internal, I mean, obviously what's on your mind. So the external is going to present you with stimulus, and you're challenged to respond. And you're challenged to respond in a way that's in service of your goals, and in service of our performance, and in service of our team's objectives. So the issue that people run into is, because of our natural wiring, when a stimulus happens in a high pressure situation, the response overlaps with it. So before the stimulus is finished presenting itself, we're already responding in a way that maybe isn't necessarily in service of what we're trying to achieve. The more you do mindfulness, the main thing that it changes in your brain is this creation of space between stimulus and response. So as George Mumford says, between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, right? That's the difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is primal, it's emotional, and a response is quite mindful. And not every situation needs this, like especially physical skills, and you want to react physically and have those fast twitch, responses, from a performance standpoint with your body. But when it comes to certain interactions with teammates, when it comes to making decisions tactically, when it comes to how you react to a referee, but most importantly, when it comes to how you respond to your own emotions and your own thinking, those stimulus that are presented to you by your own brain, that power to choose which direction you want to go next, if you want to get carried away by that tide, or if you want to stay anchored in something that you have control over, you have to be able to create some space between a stimulus and a response. And it's a really challenging thing to do under pressure, so you have to practice it. The way that we practice it, we use these two apps a lot. I can answer questions about this at the end if anyone has any. There's some great utility within both of these, and I can guide you towards what I think the best ones are. We set up mindfulness sessions at least once every 3 days whenever we're together as a team. So you see Danielle at the end of the room there. She's going to do some stretching in between, and I'm going to be leading the mindfulness. In some cases, we give them, set them up with the task on their Calm or their Headspace app that we have subscriptions to as a team. And we'll spend 5 minutes 3 times in this session that you see here, doing different mindfulness exercises, because if we want it to be a habit, if we want to have the power to choose and make sure we're making high performance choices with our attention, we absolutely have to practice it like we would any other skill. We also practice it in our warm-up, in our game warm-up and in our practice warm-up. Every single day, we do a few minutes of mindfulness in between exercises, in between stretches, again, because we want it to be normal. And for me, if you want something to be normal on the court, you have to practice it on the court with your boots on the ground, your shoes on your feet. You have to feel connected to your gear, and you have to do it in a space where you're going to normalize that. Guess what? We do mindfulness as a team. We're mindful athletes. We value our attention in this jersey and in this uniform. And the last one that I'll share is what I love about this is if you do it enough and you do it in your daily training environment, simple little mindfulness exercises with breathing pacers in the Calm app or in Headspace, and you just give them a little bit of education on here's the goal, you're going to aim, you're going to sustain, and then you're going to regain, and that's the whole process, and you just repeat. You can utilize this in really important moments. This was in Puerto Rico. We had a quick turnaround. We had a must win the next day against Brazil, who's a very good team, which dictated whether we were going to play the States or not in the final Olympic qualifier, which we ended up playing Belgium in. And this is at 11:30 or something at night. We get home, we all come out luckily in this case, there was a space to do it outside. And we just say, open your Calm app. We're going to go to breathing pacer number 4, and we're going to spend 10 minutes winding down as a mechanism to calm everyone's minds down, regain control, and start to refocus for tomorrow and hopefully get a good sleep. So I know I went a tiny bit long, 5 minutes. I'm so sorry for that. I'm going to stop my share. And
no, that's okay, don't worry.
So I took the drinking from a fire hose approach. So I hope you absorbed as much as you could, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have from a practical standpoint.
Great, thank you, Bryce. That's awesome. And in case anyone's wondering too, the couple of the resources that Bryce mentioned, I jotted them down and I'll include them in the follow-up email so that you can access those apps and the book by George Mumford. Someone just asked a question, Bryce, so I'll start reading them aloud.
Yep.
What's the best way to incorporate mindfulness to a baseball team in a COVID environment?
Good question. So obviously you know, there's two main parts to this. One is the kind of the onboarding of a new thing if it's new to the athlete. So making sure that you know, it's presented in a way that's you know, I hate to use the phrase convincing, but you know, you get them a little bit excited about it. You simplify it. You know, my mantra in general, though maybe it wasn't picked up on in this presentation in particular, when we're actually working with athletes, is simplify and execute. So, you know, there might be a million research papers on something, but as a group right now in this situation, we need to simplify it down to something we can do and then just execute that. So for me, I would, if I were you, I would use the aim, sustain, regain model, because it's a perfect simulation of what you have to do in a game. You're going to try and aim your attention somewhere. You're going to sustain it, but it's going to go somewhere else and you're going to have to bring it back. So if you want to be good at that, you have to practice it. The way that I would help them practice it is simple breathing pacer. So if you go on YouTube and you type in, and I'll, why don't I send it to you, Kirsty? So it's not in the Calm app. You don't have to go through any steps of signing up or subscribing to something. It's a simple breathing pacer that I almost prefer over the breathing pacers within both of those programs. And it's got a nice visual to it. You can change the time, so you can speed it up or slow it down. And just, you know, start simple. Just say 3 minutes. Just aim your attention at your breath for 3 minutes, and this is going to take you through on a pacer. If you notice that you've started paying attention to something else, don't worry about it. Just come back. And if you can just repeat that, you know, it's going to translate into a better mind for performance. So I'll send Kirsty the link. It's an awesome, maybe with some of you, I've even used it in a session or showed it to you, but very simple. It's like a thing that goes like this, kind of expands and shrinks on each inhale and exhale. And I know athletes that have downloaded it to their phones and prefer it over the app. So I can share that.
Yeah, great. That'd be awesome. And I'll definitely share that in the email. Thank you, Bryce. Someone else just sent a question, and I'm just going to send it to you privately, Bryce, because it is a bit long, but I will read
Sure.
it. I will read it aloud too.
Okay.
Okay. In one webinar I listened to, also related to mindfulness, an app was promoted for learning to be aware of states of mind. In a different context, I listened to an interview with a performance researcher who thought too much reliance on the apps was leading athletes away from learning to know their own body. Any thoughts on either side of that, or is there a happy balance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The apps or the pacers, you know, certainly help grease the wheels a little bit to get things going and to help them understand what, you know, the right pace for them may feel like, and it kind of proves to them that this isn't some ambiguous thing that your coach dreamt up. You know, this is a real training process. So I like that part about them, and you know, I do find they help with a little bit of buy-in and consistency. However, I don't think these are competing issues. So in the Headspace app, I've always kind of made fun of, in a joking way, I love Headspace, made fun of Headspace because they've made millions of dollars selling dead air. And, you know, a lot of what Headspace does is, like, if you listen to a Headspace session, Andy talks for, and Andy's great. He's got a great mindfulness voice, and mindfulness voices actually do matter. Andy's great as a coach on the Headspace app, but he only talks for, like, it's like golf, you know, like you spend 4 hours out there and you only play golf for like 4.5 minutes. That's like a Headspace session. You know, Andy only gives you these little bits. And what he does is he tells you to pay attention to a certain part of your body, and then he'll give you like 3 minutes to execute on that. And he might, you know, step in briefly and say, you know, I know it feels like it might be going on forever, but just, you know, stay in there and spend another 30 seconds noticing the tension in your feet. And so that's why I say I don't think these are competing issues. I think Headspace has done a really good job of actually directing people's attention towards parts of their body through the mindfulness. And if you go through the Headspace functionalities, you'll notice in the titles, some will say, you know, things about physical awareness and stuff like that. It's kind of like, what's it called? progressive muscle relaxation, which is sort of like the older school version of what Andy's doing in Headspace, where you kind of go from toe to head, flexing and tensing and then releasing parts of your body. But I find the best mindfulness teachers today, find just one part of your body to kind of intro the session. They'll say, notice your jaw, or notice, the arch in your back, and start to maybe correct it and get it to a place that's comfortable. So I don't think they're really competing issues.
Great, thanks, Bryce, and thank you for everyone asking questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to open your mic or write in the chat box.
Just in the dead time, Christy, I just wanted to add one really quick thing.
Yeah, sure.
In our Canada basketball programming, this has been really successful. So just as coaches, maybe it might be something worth noting. I believe fully in a fully integrated IST, things work together, the body and the mind work together, and these programs shouldn't be sent out separately. So myself and Lauren, who's the strength and conditioning coach, every Friday, we just spend 20 minutes on a call figuring out where the breathing is going to fit into the workout. Because these things are never separate, right, in real life and in the game. And so they should never be separate. We shouldn't separate them, or we should keep them together as much as we can. So we integrate the mindfulness into a mindful cool down. We put it between exercises. So if you are sending out physical exercises, don't hesitate to put a little bit of mental exercise in the midst of that as part of the program, because they already value physical. So if you include it in there, they're more likely to see it as just part of that value system.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Bryce. And I received another question. So what suggestions do you have in dealing with an athlete that always uses "I have ADD" about not being able to focus, aka aim? You're muted.
It's all right. I don't know why I muted myself. I'm currently the speaker. That's a bit, honestly, a bit of a sensitive question. I mean, ADD is an obviously an actual disorder, and anything that's a medical disorder does require sensitivity around it. So I think the first thing is, is that true? Is that something that someone's just saying, or is that a medical fact? If someone's diagnosed with that, and they're stating that it's impacting the way that they perform on a consistent basis, I think that warrants like a sit down with that athlete to really make sure they feel heard. If they're just kind of saying it in moments and you're perceiving it as an excuse, in my opinion, it's probably more of like their competence isn't matching, the challenge that they're being put into, and it's their way of maybe breaching that or trying to communicate that in a really ineffective way. But they're probably experiencing some truth to that, if it is a medical condition or a disorder that they've been diagnosed with. So I would sit down with the athlete and basically say, in non-judgmental communication, which is key in these sensitive issues, I would say, I've noticed that you've made a number of comments around ADHD, and I want to take that really seriously because, I want you to have success. And if you do have ADHD, it could be impacting that. So help me understand what situations, this is most difficult for you, and get them to really genuinely say, maybe it's when the coach is talking for more than 5 minutes. Maybe it's when they do workouts and people are on their own. Get them to articulate that. And if that's a real thing, you can modify the environment for that person, so that they actually have success in those key situations that they've identified. Or number two, get a medical professional involved. So say maybe we should talk to your GP and see if your GP can direct you towards some services of some kind. It could be mental performance services like sports psychology, but we're not, that's out of scope, technically speaking. So it may be some conversations with a psychologist to build some strategies to manage their ADHD as a high performance athlete, because it's not uncommon. That's actually, you know, a lot of athletes have accomplished a lot of great things with ADHD. So they should understand that they can do that. They just need to manage it appropriately.
Great, thank you. And that actually has been a topic that has been requested by some coaches, is how to coach athletes with ADHD or any other learning disability. So we are hoping to get someone on. We actually were supposed to have an in-person session on that in March. So we're hoping to have that presenter come online to present to you guys. But as you can imagine, a lot of professionals in the psychological part of the world are very busy in these times. So hopefully we can get someone on to talk about topics.
And Kirsty, I just saw that someone who asked that question said it's something they feel. It's not from a doc, so it's not diagnosed. The first most important thing in that situation is they shouldn't be claiming they have a diagnosis that they don't, because that's insensitive to people in the space who do. So number one, I would sit down with the athlete and say, you know, it would be inappropriate for me to say I don't want to do this because I have depression, because that's insensitive to people who have depression. People who have ADD, it can be a challenge for them on a day-to-day basis, and it is truly insensitive to claim that you're struggling because of something that maybe, you know, you don't have. So they need to be educated on some other ways to communicate what they're experiencing there. Like they're bored is probably, you know, a more appropriate way to say that.
Yeah, great point. And someone just added on further to that question. So can an athlete still train mindfulness even if they're diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Obviously it has to be handled appropriately, but they're probably going to have to be given a modified version of that. So there's two kinds of mindfulness. I didn't talk about the other one, but there's two main kinds that we use in the Canada basketball setting. One is focused attention, which is the aim, sustained, regain. But the other one is called open awareness. And when things get really stressful and it's just like you're A to B all day, everything's structured, you know, it just kind of piles up and it feels a little overwhelming. We'll do what's called an open awareness session, where you just put on some sounds that we equip them with. So in the Calm app, there's like rain, or there's just kind of background music. And open awareness is all about just letting your brain go where it wants to go. You know, it's trying to go places that it can't because you're constraining it all day. It's trying to think about, you know, the fact that, you know, you should call your mom later. It's trying to think about the fact that, you know, you need to run to Shoppers before the next training session, and the environment is kind of restricting it and not allowing it to process some of these thoughts. And that can compile into a very overwhelmed brain. So open awareness is just 10 minutes. You know, in our case, we spend 10 minutes just kind of noticing some of those unconscious things that just kind of serve themselves up. And you're not trying to anchor yourself in anything in particular. You're actually going to explore those as much as you want. So, you know, for someone with ADHD, they probably need more of that in the midst of that, you know, maybe aim, sustain, regain for a minute, and then 2 or 3 minutes of just open awareness, because their brain's going to want to do it a lot more than the average person. So just let it go where it wants to go, and explore those things, and then come back to aim, sustain, regain, just for a shorter interval.
Awesome, thank you. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask now. I will start to close things up, but if you do have questions, just put them in the chat box. So thank you so much, Bryce, for coming on again for another awesome session. We really appreciate this, and I know it's been a topic that a lot of coaches have requested, so we really appreciate all your insight on this topic. And as mentioned, coaches, we will follow up with those resources and those apps that were mentioned, so you can definitely look into those more and use those amongst your coaching contexts. Our next session is on Tuesday afternoon with Angela. So she is a sport dietitian at Canadian Sports Center Atlantic. She's been on here a few times, and she's going to be tackling another topic that has been requested by coaches of how to fuel your vegan and vegetarian athletes, which we talked a little bit about the difference in youth and high performance, and and the variety of diets that come with an athlete, but vegan and vegetarian are always one of the more difficult ones. So we're looking forward to that on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, we have another mental performance consultant coming on to talk about another topic. And then on Thursday, we have Tina coming on back on, who is another mental performance consultant, to talk about how to kind of implement everything we've been learning. So how to kind of put this into action. So we're kind of hoping to make that a continual session and more of an open discussion. So more details about that will be sent in the follow-up email as well. So thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks, Bryce.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Till next time.